Today we're starting in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, and we're going to read the first 5 verses. Wherefore, when we could no longer forbear, we thought it good to be left at Athens alone, and sent Timotheus, our brother and minister of God, and our fellow labourer in the gospel of Christ, to establish you and to comfort you concerning your faith, that no man should be moved by these afflictions. For yourselves know that we are appointed thereunto. For verily, when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation, even as it came to pass, and ye know. For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labour be in vain. We all have different ways of coping with being on our own. Some enjoy it and some endure it. I'm probably among the former group. What we do with our time when we're on our own is another issue. Paul was by no means a loner. In Acts chapter 20 verse 4 there's a list of 7 other companions with him as he travelled. He valued and benefited from company, but in these verses he writes about being left on his own. How did he end up in this position? Paul was sure that he should go into Greece. In Acts chapter 16 we read that he assuredly gathered that the Lord had called us for to preach the gospel unto them. There was no doubt about it, but in each city Paul visited he was opposed and forced to move on, from Philippi to Thessalonica and then on to Berea, where again he had to leave under escort. He refers to these afflictions throughout this letter. Paul also writes about the persecution and suffering of the Thessalonians. In verse 14 of chapter 2 he writes, "Ye also have suffered of your own countrymen." Indeed, in these verses he exhorts them in verse 2 not to be moved by these afflictions, because he told them to expect them. We told you before that we should suffer tribulation even as it came to pass. Verse 4. As Paul moved on from place to place and then arrived at Athens, he was therefore anxious and concerned about the young believers that he left behind. Given the ongoing persecution that they experienced, he was troubled that the tempter may have tempted them. Verse 5. That's why he sent Timotheus to establish them and to comfort them concerning their faith. Verse number 2. It was the mission that Paul sent Timothy on that meant Paul was left alone. And it goes to show how the apostle never put his own comforts before the needs of other believers. The fact that he remained alone was not what he would have chosen, but is an indication of what he was prepared to forego for the benefit of others. It's a lesson to us. How much are we prepared to forego to help others? Verse 6 of this chapter tells us of Timothy's return. What Thessalonians doesn't tell us is what Paul did while he waited. We read about that in Acts chapter 17, the last part of the chapter. It's probably when we're on our own that we waste the most of our time, but Paul was no waster. In Athens, he sees the need of the city and busies himself with reaching out to others and using opportunities to share the gospel. In Acts chapter 20, verse 13, we read about Paul going by himself on foot while others went by boat. I just can't help feel that he probably did that so that he could pray or meditate. Paul used his time alone wisely in spiritual exercises, and so should we. In the next verses, we'll look at the strength that Paul drew from the progress of others spiritually.